Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to be talking about the possible next DLC. Many of us have been speculating that it's going to be Slaanesh next, and I mean it kind of makes sense considering that we've already had a in order Tzeentch, Nurgle and now Khorne DLC, so Slaanesh makes sense to kind of round that up. And many of us have already been really tied to the idea of Slaanesh versus High Elves. The theming there is absolutely massive. But then there's the discussion around the third faction. Personally, I would prefer Dark Elves, but a lot of people seem to be speculating otherwise. So let's talk about that and see which one would make sense. Obviously, it depends, and we don't know exactly what Creative Assembly are doing. It's a big thing where it could be this, it could be that, or hell, it could be something nobody expects after all. But yeah, let's talk. So there's three races I've been seeing being speculated about. The Dark Elves being one, which would make a lot of sense. Dark Elves versus High Elves versus Slaanesh would be a hell of a matchup, and I think it would perform very well. Personally, this is the one that I would choose. But obviously, I'm not the guy making the decisions. Now, I have seen speculation revolving around Norsca. I think Legend of Total War was speculating about that, and I've seen the Reddit mention that a few times. Norsca, I don't know, I guess it could work. At the end of the day, there are some lore reasonings why this could work, so we'll jump into that a little bit later. And the last one I've seen is the Lizardmen. Personally, I don't know if Lizardmen would work too well, though. Because while the Lizardmen do require their own dedicated rework, I think that it's too many characters. There are way too many characters with the Lizardmen at the moment. They'll need a DLC where they're not going to be taking away attention from other stuff, or better yet said, that they would be able to get more attention. They need to be the one that needs to get the most here, and we can pretty much expect a small rework coming in for Slaanesh and whatever other faction comes in. Alright, let's talk about the Dark Elves first. So Dark Elves don't really have a lot missing. They are missing legendary heroes, and they could do with another lord, but it's not something that is essential for the Dark Elves. They've had a lot of attention in Warhammer 2, and even getting a brand new free LC character in the form of Rakarth. I would say that the matchup is very important, which is why I'm kind of for the Dark Elves. Lore-friendly matchups do fairly well. You've got the whole thing with like Tamokon and Elspeth. Malachi was doing his own thing, but it kind of made sense for that. When it comes to this recent DLC, everyone was kind of doing their own thing in Omens of Destruction, and I feel like the narrative being missing kind of hurt the DLC a little bit too. One thing I would say is that the Dark Elves do need a bit of a rework. Not a massive one, like say for example, what we got for the Ogres or whatever, but they need a touch-up. A lot of characters need to be given something unique. Morathi as a character needs to be given more of an incentive to be half Slaanesh and so on, which a brand new DLC would help out with. This is why I'm kind of leaning towards that. I feel like it would benefit the Dark Elves a lot, call them done, and that's it. The problem here is that there's not a lot of missing units. There are no real Lord and Heroes kind of missing unless they just go full Anointed of Slaanesh, which would kind of then mean 2 Slaanesh DLCs in one. So I'm not sure people would want that. Unless, one, they go into some really obscure lore and start creating some new units from that, like they've done with the Bloodspeaker, or Games Workshop gets involved and goes, hey, new Dark Elves. But I very much doubt that, considering that the Dark Elves are right now, as of the time of recording this video, a legacy faction for Warhammer the Old World, so that means that they're not really getting official support, barring the rules that were released and were updated ever so slightly in September. But still not fixing my damn Witch Elves. Games Workshop, please! If at worst, I could imagine that maybe the Dark Elves get skipped out on DLC content and then just get fixed up in the form of patches, but we haven't really seen major reworks come out in patches just yet, which is something that I think a lot of us were kind of expecting. They did that mini rework for the Ogres, which is kind of nice actually, but you know what I mean, right? If races are going to get fixed up during a patch cycle, it needs to be a bit bigger than that mini rework. Especially for something like the Dark Elves. Malekith needs a new mechanic, something to make him unique. The slave system could be tooled once again a little bit better, and just a few things just to kind of bring them in line to Game 3. Because one thing that's very noticeable is that the power creep is becoming worse and worse, with many Game 3 factions vastly overtaking the playability of the Game 2 ones, and even some Game 1 ones. The Empire is fine because they recently had DLC, and same as the Dwarves. The Dwarves still need a bit of a touch-up though, just to, you know, give some unique mechanics to Fulgrim and stuff like that, so they actually feel a little bit more incentivized to play. The next one is Norsca, and, well, Norsca is a faction that's been kind of ignored since their implementation in Warhammer 1, and people have been crying out for it, well, very publicly ever since. I could imagine that they could end up doing Norsca 2 for a number of reasons. They've done the Warriors of Chaos, they've done the Ogre Kingdoms, all that's left is to fix Norsca, which is the, the other pre-order incentive faction, which unfortunately just wasn't planned out too well. So it's something that could be done. If anyone needs a big rework over anyone else at the moment, it would be Norsca, because while we might take the piss out of, say, for example, the Lizardmen or pretty much any other race, they are all playable compared to Norsca. Norsca suffers very heavily from lack of character options, lack of hero options, lack of pretty much anything for that matter. Theming does still kind of work here, because if Sea Lord Aisling is the lord for the High Elves, well, he actually patrols around the Sea of Claws a lot. It's actually well-known lore, so skirmishes versus the Norscans is kind of expected there too. Missing unit-wise, there's not a lot of missing Norscans, unless Creative Assembly do have permission to go into the whole Warhammer Fantasy roleplay stuff, but again, you know, missing Spellcaster Lord and a melee hero, that's kind of expected. It's pretty simple enough. The stuff that Norsca can actually benefit from is the whole thing from the trailer. You know, we fought monsters and we became them, or whatever the hell he says. That, you know, Monstrous Arcanum, there's a lot of beasties that actually exist in Norsca, the Cursed Etin being one of them. The Basilisk can be around that area too. It would be the perfect time just to introduce a lot of monsters, which could end up with a Monster Hunter refresh there. Because the Monster Hunts, I mean, when they work, they're nice, but they could be a little bit more dynamic, and it could add in a bunch more creatures, which then would add to a lot more big monster Norscans. You've got a bunch of humans, and then just a shit ton of big beasties. I've kind of given up with the idea of a whole Tribes of the North situation. I feel like that might be a massive problem with having to create rosters for a minor faction, which would then be a minor faction for a minor faction, right? Because the Kurgans and stuff like that, they never really had rosters. They had a bunch of art or some descriptions, but it's not enough to base an army book off unless Games Workshop gets involved, and that stuff can slow down production heavily. If Norsca ends up being a DLC for this cycle, whatever the DLC ends up being called, we'll call it Two in the Pink, One in the Stink at the moment, I don't imagine that they will have that time to produce something like that. And even then, a Tribes of the North situation would have to be a solo DLC in the style of Champions of Chaos. I don't know how much Champions sold. I don't think anyone knows, barring CA staff, but I feel like something like that would be better fit for the vampires. And then lastly, the Lizardmen. So the Lizardmen do need help. They do have missing content too. Not a lot of it, but you know, there's stuff like Colchurns. They could finally turn the Thunder Lizard into a real thing. Tetaweko as a legendary lord, I think would be kind of cool, but I just don't see it happening. The Lizardmen need a lot of help, and I feel like in a DLC like this, they would need a lot more help than, say, Norsca would. I know that sounds really weird to say, but Norsca would definitely benefit from stuff from the Warriors of Chaos, right? And stuff from, like, the Monogods. In the idea of ideas being recycled or retooled, but still being made quite unique. And in most cases, Norsca has some unique stuff that just needs to be expanded upon, rather than just retooling everything. Whereas here for the Lizardmen, I mean, the Lizardmen have a lot of legendary lords, which would need something, at least something unique for them to give you incentive to play them. The spawning system, you know, the tech tree is atrocious. That one just requires a full, complete redesign. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done for the Lizardmen. I feel like the Lizardmen would benefit in a DLC where they're the center stage. As the Norsca stuff, I think, would be very equivalent to that of the Ogre Kingdoms rework, right? You know, just making sure that things work, retooling some stuff. Hell, maybe even a small fix coming out in a 0.1 or 0.2 patch prior to that, right? As much as I want to see Lizardmen actually playable, because at this point, I still stand by it, the Lizardmen aren't really that fun to play, barring Oxyotl. Maybe Nakai, I know a lot of people like Nakai, but that needs to be fixed up too, because they need to do something with the Vassal, so it's not just babysitting simulator. I feel like there's a lot more work that needs to be done there than for any other race. Again, if Lizardmen end up in a DLC, it needs to be them taking center stage and not with another Monogod faction, where a Monogod faction is also going to get a small rework. We've seen that for Nurgle, we've seen that for Khorne, not so much Tzeentch, so it's only really right to assume that Slaanesh is going to get some sort of mini rework also. Now, any of these three could be doable. To be honest, it could be literally anything else too. For all we know, it could end up just being, I don't know, Random Cafe DLC, or maybe just something else. I don't think it's going to be anything else. It has to be around these three, I think. Personally, again, Dark Elves would probably be the best one, but I feel like I'll be happy with anything because, well, my Slaanesh boys are likely going to be the main stay there for me, and then everything else is just a bonus, right? But I know there's people who are wanting DLC for specific factions, and it's taking a while, which can be a little bit frustrating. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Start a bit of a discussion. I do apologize that there's not a lot of editing here. I have been pretty much up all night. We had a bit of a health scare with one of my family members, and I wasn't able to get back to sleep after that. So we're good. He's good. Thankfully. But it's just, it was a panic. See ya, guys. Have a good one.